Welcome to this video on the Fool of the Thoth Tarot deck. As you can see, it's very different from the Rider-Waite card. Crowley talked a lot about this card, and it contains a lot of symbolism, which is both a good and a challenging thing, because the Fool really represents a very simple concept, that of nothingness, the zero here at the top, and yet he's included an awful lot of symbolism. So I've decided to go through all of the symbolism of this card, and as you can see, for those of you that want to go on past the divinatory meanings of this card, that there is a lot there, and I've further subdivided this and zoomed it up to even more detail, but it gives you an idea of the complexity that this card holds, and yet the underlying concept of this card is exceptionally simple. So for those of you that just want to pick out the divinatory meanings, I'm going to go through those next, and for those of you that want to go on and explore the deeper aspects of this card, that's what the body of this video will encompass. There's a link to the direct notes to this video in the comment section, and there's timestamps to various different sections of this video if, for instance, you just want to look at the Celtic cross bit or the astrology bit. In the description box there are links to each section of this card. Okay, so this is going to be a long video, but then that reflects the amount of symbolism that Crowley put in this card, and we'll proceed with divination. Okay, we'll go through some of the upright meanings regarding the Fool. With regards to material and practical matters, we could say he's not really very knowledgeable, because he's not really, he hasn't really engaged in the world that much, but he's spiritual intuitive. Intuition is a much more inclusive state. It sees the oneness, the wholeness behind things, rather than the intellect, which just divides things and gives things names and identities. He can also indicate new beginnings and encourage us to open to the possibility of new adventures, experiences, and to embrace them without fear of the past, just to live in the moment. So it's a great time for personal growth through this newfound openness. He also reminds us to have fun, that it's not bad to have fun. The spiritual path, which is what he essentially represents in his journey through the 21 major arcana. The spiritual path can be very intense at times, but it can also be very fun, and so he reminds us that never to lose that sense of innocence and funness that we maybe had as a child. And it can be a great source of creative insight anyway. These last 2 points were to do with how Crowley viewed the Fool. He talked a lot about it. So these normally don't appear in a section on the divinatory meanings of the Fool, but this is very much what he wanted to convey. And that was to meditate on the Fool's energy. He's telling you to relax, forget your fears, okay? But in meditation, to connect with that silence, and silence is something we're going to be talking about in the rest of the video. So we'll get a clearer idea of what we really want to do. It's only in that silence, in that stillness, that we can embrace what is our true will, what is our path in life, rather than simply conforming to what society may expect of us, which I've said there turns out really just to be a restriction. And it's also, in a deeper sense, connecting with that love in meditation, that simple, innocent and yet profound energy that sustains the universe. I've written that down there, and I'm talking about it. It seems as if I'm just saying that parrot fashion, but certainly in deep meditation, the oneness and the love that can be experienced is amazing. So what he's representing is that amazing connection with love, and to connect with what you deeply want to do in life. So that's it for the upright meanings. We'll now go on to the reverse meanings of the Fool. Just a few pointers for the reversed divinatory meanings for the Fool. First one I put down is acting recklessly, not caring about the consequences of your actions and the effects it's having on yourself and others. Wanting to break free of these social norms and restrictions we talked about, but you're doing it in a harmful way to yourself and other people. Not fulfilling your potential at present and feeling trapped, but also feeling too fearful to actually do anything about it, so you're actually stuck in that place. A lack of seriousness about an issue or life, something which is again holding you back and really not taking the bull by the horns and taking responsibility. So they're all sort of similar themes. Being restricted by what others or society think of us instead of connecting with our true path. A head full of thoughts without direction, because the Fool is all about emptiness and then about connecting with what you really want to do. So a period of meditation and stillness is needed, but maybe we put that off. Maybe our lives are just so full of work, actions, responsibilities, worry, and we just will not put off just pulling out of that for a short period of time, even if it's to daily meditate and get back in touch with your inner self. Fear of the unknown, past life events holding you back from self-expression. The Fool is all about being in the moment and enjoying that moment. So obviously if the Fool is reversed, then fear of past life events is some particular topic that comes up in a fair bit of readings that I've done. So that gives you some idea of how the Fool can be applied in terms of divination, and we'll now move on to the bulk of the video, which is all to do with the more esoteric aspects of the card, and we'll come back to Celtic Cross right at the end. This is just a quick illustration of how the Fool lies outside of the remaining 21 cards, because he is the number 0, nothing has happened. For the Fool to progress, they have to engage in this process of transformation that happens between each of the major arcana cards. So it's not just a description of the card itself that's important, it's that bit in between, it's that transition that takes place, that evolutionary bit that is the most significant of things. An example of the Fool not engaging in this process would be, I'm finding more and more that people that have never had any spiritual experiences before are starting to become psychic and developing like spiritual awareness just out of the blue, and then because this is not what they expected from their life, or it's not what other people expected from them, they'll just shut it down. They just will not engage in it. So that would be an example of someone who has a degree of openness, a degree of innocence to be able to connect to that spiritual source, but then they just shut it down and they don't go through this evolutionary process of consciousness. So for the rest of the cards, I'm going to be going through the transitions between the stages as much as the card itself. Okay, we'll move on to the next section. So I've indicated that Crowley wrote more extensively about the Fool than a lot of the other major arcana cards, and I've teased out some key concepts that he really wanted us to get to grips with regards to the Fool. So we got the number 0, which we touched on in the previous section. Second one was silence. Then we've got innocence, and finally the breath, and not in any particular order, but throughout the rest of the video we'll be covering these 4 areas. And in the next section, we're going to talk about the position of the Fool on the Tree of Life. So the Fool occupies a position on the Tree of Life between Keter and Hokmah. The minor arcana are associated with the number of the relevant Sephiroth, so the aces are contained within Keter, the 2s in Hokmah, 3s in Binah, but the major arcana occupy paths between the Sephirah, and the Fool occupies this path between Keter and Hokmah. Each one of these paths here has a name, and the name for this particular path is called scintillating intelligence. Scintillating just means shining brightly, or it can be translated as fiery, and it's the outpouring of spiritual intelligence from spirit through the creation. So it's that intelligence coming forth from the Godhead to form creation. That's the very simplistic way of looking at it. But the aces are contained within Keter here, so we've got the Ace of Wands, and that has the potential to form the whole of the suit of wands, similar with the Ace of Cups and so on. But the Fool is number 0, hasn't got a number, and therefore it's associated with these veils of negative existence which exist on or above Keter. These concepts are difficult to grasp with the mind, because the mind can only think in very limited terms, but we can think of this as like a pregnant nothingness. It's like a fertile nothingness, so although there is nothing there, it has the potential to create everything. So it contains, and as the Fool does, contains everything inside it. So it's that pregnant nothingness that exists before creation. That's one of the reasons why the Fool is androgynous, because he contains the all possibilities. Just a little bit about the subject of silence. Crowley states that it's not silence in the vulgar sense, in other words, just refraining from speech, but it's something much deeper than that, which can be accessed through special meditation techniques. He said its nature is pure being beyond both the intellect and intuition. And indeed, one of these twins, which we see down here, I'll come onto those later in more detail, one of those twins grows into the god Harpocrates, which is the god of silence. As you can see, a finger to his lips there. This is in the Eon card. And this is similar to Taoist philosophy, which says the Tao can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. So, in other words, that silence is beyond words. As soon as you start talking, you're inevitably going to corrupt the essence of what it is. So that's another subject that he wanted people to connect with regards to the Fool. We'll have a little look at innocence next. This was an important piece of text from the Book of Thoth. He says the 4th power of the Sphinx is silence. So the 4 powers of the Sphinx is to know, to will, to dare, to keep silent. It says we must understand first of all that the root of moral responsibility on which man stupidly prides himself as distinguishing him from the other animals is restriction. So in other words, just following social norms is not the way to know your true path in life. Indeed, he calls that sinful. To regain innocence is to regain Eden. So in biblical terms, the Garden of Eden represents spiritual states. He goes on to say we must cast out fear by love, seeing that every act is an orgasm. Also, love is the law, thus every act must be righteousness and truth. By certain meditations this may be understood and established, and only then is innocence made perfect. So it's finding that space within. And probably the most important bit here, it says this state is in fact a necessary condition. So innocence is a necessary condition of any proper contemplation of what we are accustomed to consider the first task of the aspirant. The solution to the question, what is my true will? In other words, what is my spiritual purpose in life, or my main purpose in life? For until we become innocent like the fool, we are certain to try to judge our will from the outside. Whereas true will should spring like a fountain of light, that scintillating intelligence, from within and flow unchecked into the ocean of life. Amazing words. So there you have it, silence and innocent together. We'll go on now to the Hebrew attribution of the fool. The Hebrew attribution to this card can be seen down in the lower left side here, and it's the letter Aleph, and the elemental attribution is air. So with Aleph, it's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it is silent. So again, you have this concept of silence coming in. This is where all of these different topics link in. And notice with early Hebrew, it's shaped like an ox's head, because this essentially means ox or ox plough, and it's to do with connecting the divine in man with earth. So it's like the totality. And here we have, someone's put in a diagram there where you've got the divine realm here and the earthly realm. So it relates really to back to the tree of life, where it's linking the divine with the earthly realm. So that is the letter Aleph, which is silent unless it is paired with another letter. Okay, we'll now move on to the astrological aspects of this card. The Fool is associated with the planet Uranus, and some of the qualities of Uranus are discovery and breakthrough. Well, that is the Fool as he goes through the major arcana cards. Lightning insight, such as that which occurs through intuition. Sudden awareness, as I said, some people start waking up to their spiritual path just completely out of the blue. And things like freedom. Well, ultimate freedom is freedom from birth and death, and knowing your immortality as spirit. Being a rebel and unusual, that is, as Crowley said, don't necessarily go and look to the norms of society for your boundaries. Obviously you can have all the negative connotations of this as well, but you can see again things like independence is well, it's only you that travels your path, and that's unique to you. And again, having the strength of independence, having the strength of following your true will and your convictions. So there's a lot in this planet that relates to the Fool. I think we'll go on to the symbolism of the Fool next, which is probably going to be the longest section. So we said the Fool was to do with new beginnings, and that's borne out in his clothing, which is green, which represents the green man of spring. Aries is the first sign in the astrological cycle, so it's the beginning of another astrological cycle of the sun. So he represents that newness, that creativity, that mysterious life-giving energy that spring is associated with. Here I've just put a couple of arrows on. That is his hat, which is Keta. It's a white crown representing the purity of spirit. And as spirit goes into duality and it gets its different flavours, its different characteristics, you get this coloured universe forming here. So adding a few more labels now, we can see we've got the yellow background here with these white flecks, and they are, that's the influence of Keta, the influence of spirit coming down into the creation. He's also taking a leap, that's taking a leap into the unknown, similar to the Rider-Waite card, where you have the Fool about to leap off the cliff. Again, he's in yellow boots representing air, and he has yellow skin. So going back to the original card here, we've got the element of air represented here, and this is important because it links in with the breath and that silence and that innocence that comes from the Fool. So this section on air links us also in with the sun, because yellow is obviously the colour of sun, and we've got sun over the genitals here. The sun is a planet that rules Tibereth, which is on the middle pillar of the Tree of Life, right at the centre, and it's got this link directly in with Keter and the Godhead here, and it's the centre of Christ consciousness. It's that link between God and man. Sun over genitals also represents that creative element, which is to do with the spring, newness, and the Fool, and his willingness to raise that energy for his spiritual purpose. And next up we have the three spirals. We have an outer spiral here, a middle spiral, and also an inner spiral. These are said to represent the three veils of negative existence sitting above the Tree of Life. They form like an umbilical cord here and form a heart shape over his heart chakra, and it's really that link in with spirit and the heart, and that quality of love that I talked about in Crowley's scripture in the previous slide. So in this picture here, sorry it's a bit blurred, the soul is said to reside in the heart chakra, which if we look at a section across here divides the upper from the lower chakras. And so on the Fool there you've got the raising of this energy. It could be Kundalini energy through the spine to the top here, to the top chakra. And those three spirals that I identified, it's also said that it mimics the spiral nature of the universe, and here we can see a galaxy and the spiral nature of how it is seen in space. So that's another link in with this spiral formation in the card. So we'll now take this inner spiral here and see what's on it. So we have a dove with emanations of light coming from it. We have a vulture, which you can barely see here, but the arrows covering the vulture's head, and we have a butterfly, and we have the caduceus here topped with a pine cone, and you've got a sword here with the tip of the sword. I've got a zoomed up image of the caduceus. So here's your pine cone, that's your winged head, these are your serpents, and the sword ends here, and you have the tip of the sword. So the tip of the sword really represents, again, it's an element, it's attributed to air, and the pine cone is to do with fertility, and we'll come on to that. Obviously you have the winged head of the caduceus there. The caduceus is also associated with Mercury and the Magnus, and it's to do with communication. Mercury was the messenger god that essentially made communication between the gods and man possible. So it was a flighty thing, again representing the element of air. And we also have, on this inner spiral, we had the dove here. And I said there were emanations coming from the dove. So I actually looked for the amount of emanations there were. I had a hard time spotting 20, but underneath the magnifying glass I think I got 20. There's said to be 20 emanations coming from the dove. So the dove is its spirit essentially coming down from the veils of negative existence, coming into the Fool. So that spirit coming into matter. The 20 emanations are significant. Go back to them here. The number 20 is the gematria for the word Yod. Yod is part of the Tetragrammaton, and this has the same value for the Hebrew root for vision. So essentially it's that spiritual vision coming into the Fool. Notice it's going in to his heart chakra, so that's the vision of the spirit going inside him there. And I said it was related to Yod, which is the first letter of the Tetragrammaton, and so it's the start of that cycle of creation, that beginning. We're going back to that newness, that beginningness, that creativity. We also have this vulture on the inner spiral, and that is related to the goddess Mut. That's M-U-T, and you can see the vulture headdress here. So the name Mut, M-U-T or Mut, my Egyptian's not that great. She was thought to be a hermaphrodite, in other words, having the power of both male and female reproduction, and therefore she was a goddess and creator of all things. It had its basis really in the notion that there were no male vultures, and female vultures were actually impregnated by the winds, which was air. So this coming back to the element of air. And so it's all about creativity at the end of the day, creativity and self-reliance, which again are central attributes of the Fool. So I've now added a few more labels onto this card. The winged caduceus here, the pine cone, and the butterfly. So the butterfly was the last thing to talk about on the inner spiral. And again, it represents air, the soul entering the body of the Fool as he takes up his spiritual quest. So the job of the butterfly is to transform, and likewise it's the quest of the Fool to transform. As you know, the butterflies come from the caterpillar, so there's like a transformation element to that as well. So it's all about evolution to a higher state of consciousness. I said I'd come back to the pine cone here and why it's on top of the caduceus. It really goes back to ancient times with Dionysus, and you can see here, if I should be able to highlight it here, that's the pine cone, and it's called a thrysus, and that is essentially, you've got a staff here with vines entwined around it like the serpents, representing the Kundalini energy here. And these the tips of these pine cones were said to be dipped in honey, and so the pine cone itself represented the pineal gland, and the honey was symbolic of the spiritual sexual energy. So the pine cone, the pineal gland is activated in Kundalini yoga. The staff here represents the spine. Sorry, and I've said that the ivy represents the Ida and Pingala energy currents. So it's all related to spiritual energy. Next, I'll just mention the grapes here, which are fairly significant. The stem of the grapes again goes through to his heart chakra, linking with the three veils of negative existence. So you've got the element of divine intoxication, giving him a smile, so he's not sad, he's not separate from things, he's intuitively going forward and he sees the joy in life. So these grapes here were linked to Bacchus, the god of wine, and divine intoxication. So the next thing I want to do is just have a look at this bag of coins here, which is quite different from the Fool, where he just carries a bag on his back. I have a large card version of the Fool and I scanned it in, and this is how I got the detail that I have. So, and then I just edited sections from it. So this is the actual bag of coins, and in red we have the labels for the star signs. So you've got Aquarius here, Capricorn, Cancer, Gemini, Taurus, Bull and Aries, and you have the sun in the centre with the ancient planets around. So you have Saturn, the moon was counted as a planet, Mercury and so on. So the symbolism of this is really related to the Labours of Hercules, because the Labours of Hercules was all about astrology and how the each of the planets on each of the tasks that Hercules did was related to working through the zodiac. So it's working out his karma and conquering the 12 star signs. That is the underlying message of Labours of Hercules. Alice Bailey does an astrological interpretation of this in her book. So the significance of that in regarding the Fool is this really is the sum total of experiences that he's got to conquer. I guess we can look at the Rider-Waite card and just put that into perspective. So here we have the Fool. This is the sun. Notice it is white, it's not yellow. It represents Keta. The bag here is his bag of karma. They're not experiences because he's the Fool and he's just going out into the world and he's just embarking on his spiritual path. And notice that this bag of experience is in the way of the sun and his head chakra there. So there's like a block. His karma is blocking him from experiencing his divinity. So that's the same sort of principle that's expressed in the Rider-Waite deck. Next up, we just go to the very top here, and again we've got this flaming pine cone here, fire, and you have a cup with a pyramid base here, and he's pouring the contents of this union between fire and the cup. The cup is something that receives the fire, and you get the creation forming in this card, and indeed you've got the twins down here, and this is related to the tetragrammaton where you've got the pine cone representing the yod, the fiery yod, as we saw in the Ace of Wands. Then you've got the receiving female, and then the son and the daughter with the twins, and then the daughter passing the energy back to the yod. So you have this cycle of creation. We have the tiger, which Crowley describes as fawning. with regards to the Fool, and fawning is like an exaggerated flattery. So in this case, it's not the aggression of the tiger, it's actually the distraction of it. And that's really what happens when you are on the spiritual path. You'll get all sorts of distractions, all sorts of things which may flatter your attention, but you've got to stay focused on your spiritual purpose. So that was what I think Crowley was getting at when he said the tiger was fawning at the Fool. Now I want to talk about this flower arrangement below the Fool. So we'll have a look at that in close-up. So I'm looking at this flower arrangement here, so I'm going to take a close-up of that so you can see in context. You have a white rose at the top. The rose really is again a symbol of air in Golden Dawn rituals, and it also links it in with the purity of Keter. We saw something similar in the Fool here, where he's got the white rose. At the bottom here you have lilies. Lilies are sometimes associated with funerals, so again you've got this life cycle here of life and death. You've got a 5-petal lily here, 3 times 4 petal lilies on the left hand side, so you've got 12 plus 5 is 17, and these symbolise the 16 sub-elements which are contained within the court cards. So it's ultimately saying the governance of spirit over matter, and the sub-elements just being different combinations of the elements of fire, water, air and earth. So ultimately again it's that principle of totality, of having everything inside the Fool, and that completeness. So he's on his spiritual journey, he's got everything inside him, and yet he just doesn't realise it. He's got to go through the other cards to do that. So the twins here I'm not going to talk about in great detail, because you'll see them in context when they reappear in the Sun, and before that the Lovers card. But they mature into Harpocrates, or the child Horus, which you see in the Eon card, and indeed Ra-Hokuit, which is a composite deity. They also represent the final 2 elements of the Tetragrammaton, the Vav and the Hay final. So that's all I really want to say about them at this time, but the Eon card, it all comes together there. So we have the crocodile here, and it's to do, and its inclusion is to do with a process known as parthenogenesis, and Paul Hughes Barlow talks a lot about it in a video. In fact, he has dedicated a whole video to this. And it's essentially a mode of asexual reproduction in which the offspring are produced by females without the genetic contribution of a male. And we saw that in Mut, the Egyptian goddess, with the vulture here, and they were thought to be impregnated by the air without a male contribution. And the reason they're included in the Fool card, for me, I think, is this sense that the Fool contains everything within himself. He does not need anything outside of himself other than this connection, this fertilization coming from spirit, which is already in him. He just needs to activate it. And so this is why you get a lot of this asexual reproduction things in the Fool card. Also, with regards to the crocodile, it devours, and devouring is a term that can be used by the mystic, and that he's devoured by his spiritual path. It's all-consuming. Here we have a moon underneath, on top of the crocodile, and underneath the twins here, which you can barely see on the card, but you can see in the close-up here. So we have the sun, the moon, and creation of the twins happening. So I think that's it with regards to the symbolism. There is a relationship of the Fool to the universe, and that the universe is essentially everything that the Fool gains from his spiritual path. It says in the book of Revelations that God is the Alpha and the Omega, so obviously the Fool is the Alpha and the universe is the Omega. So that's the beginning and end of the spiritual journey. So we'll now move on to just the divination section in regards to the Fool and the Celtic cross. These are just some of the ways in which the Fool can influence a Celtic cross spread. So if it's the very first card that comes out, the heart of the situation, it can indicate the need to trust in the process of life. Take a leap into something that you care passionately about, but with an open mind. It's also really telling you to go deep within yourself and find out what it is that you truly want from life. What is your true life purpose? If the Fool is crossing here, it means that it is covering the energy of the first card. So a possible obstacle could be that you are lacking joy and adventure in your life, that you want something new to come along and that life is feeling stale. Position number 3, subconscious influences, are usually fears from the past stopping you from expressing your sense of self in the present. So it's usually these things that we push into our subconscious that we don't really want to deal with, and when the Fool appears here, is normally to do with fear. Hopes and goals in position number 5, I'll come back to 4, is really wanting the freedom to express yourself and find your true purpose in life. That relates to back to the number 1 position. But if we actually put it in position 4 here, it could mean past reckless actions, not being clear on your life path, getting too engrossed in the world. Or it could be, depending on the spread here, a period of opportunity and growth, and the rest of the spread could be about how that growth is going to occur and what obstacles or challenges may lay ahead, depending on the spread in question. So we move on to immediate future. It could mean that life may throw up an unexpected chance, and you're encouraged to look deeply into that and see what would be there for you to change your life for the better. Position number 7, our self-image, could be carefree, dislikes rules, regulations and norms, and wanting to be a free spirit. Position number 8, how others see you. If this is reversed, trying to give you a balance of plus and minus. If it is reversed here, it could mean that others see you as somewhat reckless, ruled by fear from previous bad experiences. But obviously if it is upright, then others may see you as a source of inspiration, a source of joy and happiness, and a connection to their own spirituality. So we move on to position 9, guidance and warning. So now is the time to take time out, meditate and connect with your inner purpose. It's a warning that your potential may not be realised until you make this deep connection and live a life in a much more supporting and loving way towards yourself. Finally, overall outcome, life can throw up unexpected opportunities. Take time to meditate on these. It's a good card to have in the final position because it's showing the new you that is coming forth, and out of all this experience from the rest of the spread, you're able to move on from whatever difficulties you've had, things that are holding you back, restrictions in your external and internal life. And so yeah, that's about it for position 10. So that summarises this very long video on the Fool, and I hope some of it has been of use to you. Thanks ever so much for watching. Take care.